Thank you, and thanks for coming. This, as you have guessed, is the Productive Programmer Talk. You can actually download the slides for this talk if you want from my website, and also the samples from this talk are available there as well if you want them. One of the questions I get so much that I've actually added it to this presentation is, where did this topic come from? And it turns out that I was doing a talk at a Java users group in the US in Virginia, and the guy who runs that users group is a friend of mine, a guy named David Bach, and he was nice enough to come to the airport and pick me up. And so when we were driving, we were having this conversation. Now, I had just recovered from my previous book project, which usually takes about 2 years to recover from the pain and all the other awful stuff that goes into a book project. So I was just starting to think about what would make another topic for a next book. And one of the things I was asking everybody I ran into was, is the world ready for another book on regular expressions? And it turns out that it's not, because this book is so good. This book is almost like a vacation beach reading. It's so good. And you'd be surprised that a book about regular expressions could be that good, but the consensus from everyone that I talk to is that no one will ever write another regular expressions book because this one is just too good. And so it wasn't going to be that. And David and I were talking, and we said, well, one of the things that we had noticed is that a lot of developers now grew up in graphical operating systems, like Windows and the Mac, and had never really spent any quality time at the command line. And while graphical operating systems are very good for beginners, they slow power users down. And that's one of the things that David and I had done a lot of kind of instruction for younger people on our team, or people that didn't have enough experience in command lines, is how to effectively use the command line. And so we thought, well, that'd be kind of a cool book of effective command line use. And so we contacted Pragmatic Press and started working on a book called The Productive Programmer. But then two things happened to David. One is he had triplets. Actually, his wife had triplets, but he was involved. And this is an actual picture of the Bach triplets. You'll notice they were issued Macs at birth, which is good. The other thing that happened to David was he left his job of many years and became a consultant, and instantly became 300% allocated, so much so that his consulting company, the first 2 years they were in existence, their web page was a parking page saying, coming soon, more stuff about code Sherpas, because they were so busy. But another thing had happened to me. I continued to kind of work on this book, and something else had happened to me is we had kind of envisioned it as being this giant recipe book of command line tricks. And I had then come to the realization that that would be the dullest book ever written. Because recipe books are good if the recipe that you want is right there in front of you, but it's hard to predict all the possible things that you'd want. But in the meantime, I had been gathering up all these recipes from my friends, and every time I ran across one, I would gather it up. And I realized that they all kind of went into categories. Now, I'm a developer, and my actual title has the word architect in it, so I tend to think of the world in terms of patterns and those sorts of things. And I started developing this idea of these productivity principles or patterns, the things that make you productive. The problem with that was this was still a Pragmatic Press book, and they had in mind that this was kind of a sequel to this book, The Pragmatic Programmer. It was going to be kind of almost a workbook for Pragmatic Programmer, and it was less and less that. It was becoming more of its own thing, and it didn't really fit into the way Pragmatic Press wanted to work. So to make a long story short, which is way too late for that now, I took that book and left Pragmatic Press and went to O'Reilly and said, hey, I've got this book on programmer productivity, and it was published last July. That book is split into two parts, mechanics and practices. And what I'm talking about today is the mechanics section, the mechanics of the things that make you more productive as a programmer. Not as a casual computer user, but as a programmer. And I've developed these 4 principles of productivity that fit into those categories. And one of them is acceleration, which is doing stuff faster. Focus, which is a way to kill distractions and other things that keep you from getting work done. Automation, which is about getting your computer to work harder for you rather than you working harder for your computer. And finally, canonicality, which is applying the dry principle that was defined in the Pragmatic Programmer book. So what I'm going to do in this talk is give you a few examples of each one of these principles as it pertains to developers, and most specifically Java developers, although it applies universally. This is part of the Java track here, so I purposely picked examples that use Java or revolved around Java for the most part, or at least peripherally attached to Java. So let's talk about these. The first principle I'm going to talk about is the principle of acceleration, which is getting stuff done faster. One of the observations that I made is that developers spend way too much time opening trees. Anytime that you use a mouse to navigate either system or your IDE or wherever it is, you're basically wasting time. Especially if you know the name of the thing that you want, all you're really doing over and over is proving to your computer that you have good hand-eye coordination. Because in a graphical system, to find a file, you have to go and expand the tree and expand the tree and expand the tree and expand the tree, and then you see what you want, use your hand-eye coordination to move the mouse cursor up to click it and do something with it. And you prove over and over and over to your computer that you have good hand-eye coordination. Let me give you a clue. Your computer doesn't care about your hand-eye coordination. So there are ways to get things done faster. And typing in lieu of navigation is certainly one of those, and I want to talk about that on a couple of examples coming up. Before I talk about that, though, I want to talk about something that's frustrating to me. Clipboards. Why do operating systems only have one clipboard with one entry in them? Are clipboards some sort of protected natural resource that we need to really protect and not give out as many clipboards as people need? This is really frustrating because once you get used to having multiple clipboards, it's really painful to go back to one, because what are you going to do if you have some non-contiguous, non-continuous text over here and you want to paste it over here and you only have one clipboard? You have to go to the source and copy and then Alt-Tab and paste and Alt-Tab and copy and Alt-Tab and paste, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, which is a big waste of time. Or worse, you copy something and then you realize you got to go do something else right quick, and you go over there and it's like, oh, well, I can't use the clipboard now because it's got this thing on it that I need later, and so you do something silly like open up another editor so you can paste the thing, the temporary thing there. That's a giant waste of time. Fortunately, there are solutions to this problem. For Windows, there's a free utility called CLCL that you can download that gives you infinite clipboard history for Windows. When I say infinite, it's 100 entries. So now you have 100 entries on your clipboard. And the Mac has a couple of these as well. One is called iClip, which costs money, and the one that I use is called jumpcut. And here's an example of jumpcut. It shows up as a little icon on your toolbar up at the top, but you can also hit a hotkey for it, and basically when you hit the hotkey, it walks through all the things that you have in your clipboard history, and you pick one of them, and it pastes it. You get really used to having this facility because now I've noticed part of my work process is that when I copy some sort of text or use some sort of little snippet of text, there's a good chance I'll need that again in 10 minutes for some reason. And so a lot of times now I'll proactively dump stuff on my clipboard just so I can go grab it later. So having that infinite clipboard history, you get really used to. A lot of the IDEs have it, but I'm talking about having it for the entire operating system, because all that context switching back and forth eats time, and it's not very efficient. So talking about command prompts, graphical explorers are better for some things, like seeing the relationships of files and the trees and all that sort of stuff, but command lines are better for others. A lot of times, just a few keys on a command line is more efficient than trying to do some operation in a graphical explorer.